Order, order. We start with questions to Secretary of State for Scotland, Patricia Gibson.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, last weekend Scotland once again showed the world that we can host fantastic sporting events with the World Indoor Athletics Championships held in Glasgow. And I offer my congratulations to everyone involved, especially medal winners Gemma Reekie from Ayrshire and Josh Kerr from Edinburgh, the first Scottish man to win a gold medal in these championships in over 30 years. Mr. Speaker, I also congratulate the Scottish rugby team, who, thanks to their recent victory over England, have now won the Calcutta Cup 4 times in a row. And, Mr. Speaker, I would add it would have been 5 in a row, but COVID got in the way. Turning to question 1, Mr. Speaker, contrary to what we hear from the SNP, the Scottish Government is well funded. This UK Government has provided a record block grant averaging £41 billion a year, with an additional £2.4 billion across the last 3 fiscal events. Scotland continues to benefit from the Barnett formula, under which the Scottish Government receives around 25% more funding per person than equivalent spending across the United Kingdom.
Patricia Gibson.
Can the Secretary of State explain how his government's £1,600 million cut to Scotland's capital budget over the next 3 years will impact on the provision of infrastructure, roads, hospitals, schools, new homes, digital connectivity, and the economic growth we need to escape the recession into which the Tories have dragged us?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's nice to see the Honourable Lady and her colleagues have turned up for work today, even if that's in defiance of the Deputy Leader of the SNP, who thought they shouldn't bother coming. But I want to be clear on the resource spending, on the capital budget. The Scottish Government are able to divert their resource spending for capital and infrastructure investments, and they also can borrow to enhance capital investments if they so choose.
Douglas Ross.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State is correct that the block grant from the UK Conservative Government to Scotland is the highest it's ever been. But despite that, just last week, the SNP Green Government pushed through their tax and acts budget in Scotland. So does my right honourable friend agree that the Nationalists have got the wrong priorities for Scotland, cutting services while increasing the income tax rates for anyone earning over £28,867?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do agree with my honourable friend, and I'd further add that the Scottish Government's 6 tax bans, as opposed to the 3 tax bans that the UK Government have, are really holding Scotland back.
Shadow Minister Michael Shanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And while the SNP and the Tories argue about the financial settlement between 2 governments, there are 2 things that they do agree on. Firstly, that working people should pay the price of this economic mess with raising tax to sky-high levels. And secondly, until at least today anyway, they agreed that oil and gas giants earning record profits shouldn't face a proper windfall tax, although it now seems like the SNP might be the only people holding out that position. So now the question is, who does the Secretary of State support? The Scottish Tory leader who's standing up in Holyrood today attacking an extension of the windfall tax, or the Chancellor, who we understand is about to announce exactly that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my position has always been clear. I believe that the energy profits levy on the excess profits caused by Putin's illegal war in Ukraine was the right thing for the government to do, to give support to people with their cost of energy, the cost of living prices.
SNP spokesperson Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. He started so well. Can I agree with him on the Calcutta Cup? I was there to witness a historic occasion, and also in the World Athletics Championships in Glasgow as well. I actually played rugby with Gemma Reekie's cousin for many, many years, so my congratulations to them. However, everything from that point on, from all sides of the House, has been absolute nonsense. At a time when many Scots are struggling to pay their energy or shopping bills due to the rampant inflation his government has presided over, and with inflation in the public sector running even higher, his government has cut the Scottish Government's funding in real terms again, and now Commons Library research shows the Scottish block grant will be at its lowest level of UK Government spending since the start of devolution. So, as the Secretary of State counts down the weeks to his departure, is he proud of his legacy?
Secretary of State.
That's a very easy one to answer, Mr. Speaker. I'm very proud of my legacy. Whether it's been rather like winning 4 Calcutta Cups, I've won in court with the Scottish Government 4 times, whether it's any number of things I'd like to list with my legacy, but importantly, it's a record block grant of £41 billion that this Scottish Government received, and on top of that, record Barnett consequentials, and another, because spending in Scotland is 25% higher per person than the average in the UK, that equates to an extra £8.5 billion.
Newlands.
I had no idea, Mr Speaker. We should all just be very grateful. Very grateful indeed for the largesse of the Secretary of State. But does that largesse extend to capital funding? Because capital funding to the Scottish Parliament hasn't just been cut, it's been slashed by 10% on his watch. That's money that could have been used to invest in hospitals, schools and infrastructure, about to be frittered away by the Chancellor on a sickening pre-election bribe that will buy precisely no one. Will he finally accept that it's his government's bust austerity that is driving public services to the edge? And does he support tax cuts at a time when even Tory voters know that increased public investment is required?
Yeah. Secretary of State.
Mr Speaker, this is nonsense. Austerity is not a thing under this government, not a thing at all. No, absolutely not. Departmental spending, and this is the point the SNP don't acknowledge. Departmental spending throughout this Parliament has grown by 3.2% on average. That's the simple truth.
Christine Jardine. That's easy.
Question number 2, please.
That's easy.
Mr Speaker, I've had frequent and recent discussions with the Foreign Secretary on the Scottish Government's international relations policy. Foreign affairs are reserved for the United Kingdom Government, and we have been clear to the Scottish Government that they must respect this.
Thank you very much. First of all, can I associate myself with the Secretary of State's comments about the Scottish victory in the Calcutta Cup? But does he share my concern that these recent forays into international relations by the SNP are not only inappropriate because it is a reserved matter, but potentially damaging both to important relationships between Scotland's 2 governments and, critically, to UK foreign policy at a time when we have international tensions at a height we haven't seen since the Cold War?
Mr Speaker, I do agree with the honourable lady. It's very important that the United Kingdom Government speaks with one voice, and the United Kingdom is seen to speak with one voice on foreign affairs. And I note, Mr Speaker, that Angus Robertson has produced another independence document this week, and it is on foreign affairs and defence. And a lot of nonsense in there too. They want to join the NATO nuclear alliance, but they want to get rid of the nuclear deterrent. They want to join the EU, but not the euro. They want to have a Scottish spy agency. Some are referring to it as the Sleekit service, with agents heading across Europe in their motorhomes that are bulletproof. Mr Speaker, all nonsense, a complete waste of taxpayers' money.
Gregory Campbell. Secretary of State.
Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to say I have had discussions with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland about maximising trade links now the Northern Ireland Executive has been restored. What's more, the United Kingdom Government has committed to establishing the East-West Council. This will identify opportunities for deepening connections between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom, including the scope for extending the Northern Ireland Investment Zone, which may bring benefits, I hope, to Stranraer and Cairnryan.
Rick Campbell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Will the Minister ensure that business bodies in Scotland are fully aware of, for example, the new Intertrade UK body, so that they can see that business can prosper between Northern Ireland and Scotland? And also, very importantly, will he ensure that people can see the improvement in business trade flows between Scotland and Northern Ireland in 6 months' time compared to 6 months ago?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr Speaker, as set out in the command paper, the UK Government is working to establish Intertrade UK, and this will fulfil our pledge to grow the economy by ensuring that businesses large and small can make the most of the East-West trading opportunities. And implementing the Windsor framework in the command paper, the government's priorities, and we will, I say to the honourable gentleman, we will provide an update in very close time.
And it's going to go.
Mr Speaker. Thank you. With permission, Mr Speaker, I will answer questions 4, 5 and 9 together. We prioritise bringing inflation down, the key to reducing cost of living pressures. We delivered on the Prime Minister's promise by more than halving it. In addition, the UK Government supported households with a package worth £104 billion, or an average £3,700 per household across the United Kingdom, including in Scotland.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, families in my homeland are reeling from the cost of living crisis as both the Tory UK Government and the SNP Scottish Government have jointly loaded them with the highest tax burden in 70 years. Does the Minister agree it's time that both governments stopped going round in circles, left the dance and cleared the floor for Labour governments to sort out their sorry mess?
Mr Speaker, well, I do not agree with the honourable gentleman's conclusions. Thanks to this government, 2.4 million workers in Scotland benefited from £340 back in their pockets thanks to the national insurance cut in January. But I would agree that I don't agree with the SNP government's approach to tax in Scotland, making Scotland the highest tax part of the United Kingdom.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Scottish rail fares are set to rise by 8.7% next month, and this eye-watering fare hike will hit Scots hard during a cost of living crisis and push Scotland's rail service into a spiral of decline. Does the Minister not agree that we need affordable fares to help people through the cost of living crisis and encourage more people to travel by train?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I would certainly agree that we should do all we can to encourage people to travel by train. The Scottish Government's approach to ScotRail perhaps might discourage that, but I'm happy to meet the honourable member to discuss this.
Stephen Morgan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Recent findings from the Trussell Trust have revealed that 32% of people claiming universal credit in Scotland have fallen into debt because they couldn't pay essential bills. Does the Minister agree with me that the people of Scotland and the people of Britain shouldn't be made to pay for SNP and Tory failures?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, since we're in 2021-2022, there are 1.7 million fewer people in absolute poverty after housing costs than what there were in 2009-2010, including 400,000 fewer children. So I certainly believe this government is taking lots of action to address poverty, particularly in work poverty, but I would agree that making Scotland the highest tax part of the UK does not help with that.
John Stevenson.
Yeah, Mr Speaker, would the Minister agree that putting up taxes in the way that the SNP are doing at present will do nothing to help with the cost of living? But would he also further agree that if they continue in this trajectory of increasing taxes, more and more Scots will want to leave and come to places like Carlisle, where of course they will be very welcome?
Mr Speaker, due to the SNP tax rises in Scotland, anyone earning over £28,867 will pay more income tax than those people living in England. Certainly from my own experience representing a Borders constituency, there is increasing evidence of people choosing to live south of the border rather than in the high tax Scottish jurisdiction, and with my discussions with STEM businesses, they increasingly find it difficult to recruit in Scotland because of the aggressive high tax policies of the SNP.
Shadow Secretary of State Ian Murray.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Regardless of what the Chancellor announces today, we're in the highest taxing-raising Parliament in history, and this is a consequence of the Minister's government's failure over 14 years. Ordinary hard-working Scots did not cause this economic crisis. The government did, but they are being made to pay for it. There have been 25 Tory tax rises since the last election, and the average family is much worse off as a result. So does the Minister agree with the Institute for Fiscal Studies that even after today's budget, the overall tax burden on working people will still reach record levels?
Mr Speaker, well, clearly I'm not going to speculate on what the Chancellor will be announcing shortly, but I would just remind the honourable gentleman that 2.4 million workers in Scotland have benefited from £340 going back into their pockets thanks to the changes to national insurance which have already been announced. In relation to his wider points about the tax burden, we should not forget the reason why, as a consequence of the huge interventions the government made to support workers and families and communities and businesses during the pandemic, and we're having to repay that. But that saved jobs and saved many businesses from going under during the COVID pandemic.
Ian Murray.
The Chancellor says today working people will still be paying a much higher tax burden at the end of this Parliament, and it will reach record levels. And shockingly, the tax burden in Scotland is even higher. Anyone in Scotland earning more than £29,000 per year is paying more tax after the SNP voted for yet another income tax rise on working people. That means we're in the absurd position in Scotland of the SNP raising taxes on nurses and teachers whilst opposing Labour's plan for an extended windfall tax on the oil and gas giants. We even hear the leader of the Scottish Conservatives threaten to resign last night on potentially another U-turn from the Chancellor on the windfall tax. So doesn't the Minister accept that the best thing to happen now would be for this circus to be brought to an end and for the Prime Minister to call the election?
As I said to the honourable gentleman earlier, I'm not going to speculate on the contents of the budget, but when the election comes, Mr Speaker, the voters of Scotland will have a very clear choice: a party that's going to stand up for Scotland's place within a strong United Kingdom, or the Scottish National Party, which wants another referendum. I'm unclear what the Labour Party has to offer.
Alister Carmichael.
Number 6, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We want all farmers to get a fair price for their products, and the Government is committed to tackling contractual unfairness that exists in the agri-food supply chain. We will use the powers in the Agriculture Act 2020 whenever necessary. At the NFU conference, the Prime Minister announced the UK Farm to Food Summits would be an annual event. This will help strengthen the joint working by government and external partners to support a prosperous agri-food sector.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister should be aware that his colleagues in DEFRA have recently concluded a consultation on contractual relationships in the fresh produce industry. At a time when 23% of dairy farmers doubt that they will continue in business into 2025, will he impress on his colleagues in DEFRA and the Department of Trade that action now in relation to that consultation is urgent?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, as a Borders farmer's son, I completely understand the invaluable work that farmers and crofters do to put food on our tables across Scotland and indeed across the United Kingdom. And this Government will continue to support the agriculture and food production sector. Scotland Office Ministers regularly attend the Interministerial Group for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, along with representatives from the devolved administrations. This group oversees how changes to price, supply and trade affect our markets, and will continue to take whatever action is necessary to support this important sector.
Smith.
Question number 7.
Mr Speaker, our union is strong. Scotland's contribution, yes it is. Scotland's contribution to the United Kingdom is beyond doubt, and this Government's commitment to Scotland is without question. From free ports and investment zones to the record block grant and the £1.5 billion for the 12 city and region growth deals, we deliver for Scotland.
Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. SNP MPs have been disengaged from Westminster for years. So does the Secretary of State agree with me that it's a disgrace that their deputy leader has said should they win seats at the next general election they will not engage? Does he agree with me that members elected to this House should turn up and do their jobs?
I do agree with the Honourable Lady.
Davis.
3 years ago, on the 16th of March 2021, we had a debate in this House on precisely the subject of this question. At the time, I was concerned Nicola Sturgeon's government were covering up interference in the complaints process against the First Minister. Since then, in defiance of the Information Commissioner and of a court order, they've continued to cover up. Can the Cabinet Secretary look at whether the Ministerial Code and the Civil Service Code have been broken in this context?
Mr Speaker, I would say to my right honourable friend that he should write to the Cabinet Secretary and ask him to do that very thing.
Richard Graham.
Mr Speaker, successive energy ministers have hugely... Number 8.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Government is firmly committed to supporting Scotland's marine energy sector to grow. Around 80% of tidal stream contracts awarded through contracts for difference in the last 2 rounds were deployed, will be deployed in Scotland. In addition, Horizon Europe selected 2 Scottish-based UK tidal stream developers to develop projects in Orkney. They will lead to construction on 2 £17 million projects funded by the UK Government's financial guarantee.
Graham.
Now, I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, and he knows that successive energy ministers have hugely helped the development of the marine energy sector in Scotland as elsewhere in the United Kingdom. Would my honourable friend agree with me that there is an opportunity in the next round of renewables auction to allow for wave technologies alongside tidal stream technologies? And will he also encourage the Scottish Government to speed up approvals of the sites so that we can get great green energy projects started as soon as possible in Scotland as elsewhere?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for my honourable friend for that important question. The Government is undertaking an analysis of the technology pipeline available for contracts for difference auction round 6 against our legal obligation to ensure the auction round is competitive. We are considering the appropriate parameters for all technologies, including tidal stream and wave energy. Final parameters will be published in the budget notice this month ahead of the auction round opening.
Jane Duggan.
The Sea Star tidal farm off the coast of Orkney is set to be the largest tidal energy farm anywhere in the world and was supported by EU funding through the European Marine Energy Centre. This comes after Edinburgh University's report finds that the UK Government can save hundreds of millions of pounds by bringing forward the development of tidal by years if it worked closer with its EU partners. It's quite clear that the EU's role in this in Europe and around Scotland is very important. So if Scotland is better together with anyone, isn't it better together with the EU and its investment in tidal?
Mr. Speaker, what a load of nonsense from the honourable member. Scotland is much better served by being part of the United Kingdom and will continue to support all renewable energy sectors, including tidal.
Jamie Stone.
Number 10, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this Government recognises the invaluable work that all NHS workers do. I see this every day of the week in my own constituency in the Scottish Borders. That's why the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care has written to the Scottish Government regarding working together to reduce patient waiting times. We continue to be open to exploring this further.
Mr. Speaker, I have a lady constituent who suffers from a rare and dangerous condition called subglottal stenosis. There is only one clinic that has expertise to treat this condition, and it is in London. And yet our local health board is refusing to refer her. They say they can offer another treatment, but it is thought to be less safe and possibly not very effective. So can I ask, what steps is the Government taking to ensure that patients, regardless of which side of the border they live, will get the best possible treatment?
Hear, hear, Jim.
Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm regularly reminded, particularly as a border, as an MP for the borders, of the need of healthcare for benefits on either side of the border, particularly cross-border working with the NHS. Local people in the borders often get treatment faster and easier because of it. Sadly, the honourable member has highlighted a real problem with Scotland's NHS thanks to the mismanagement by the SNP government of Edinburgh, particularly of rural health services. Now, he's identified a very distressing case for his constituent, and I'm very happy to write to the Scottish Government along with him to raise this case with them.
Theresa Villiers.
Question 11, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Scotland Office ministers have banged the drum tirelessly to promote the Scottish food and drink industry overseas, including on trade missions in Europe, India, the United States of America and Vietnam. In Vietnam, sales of Scotch whisky have already increased fourfold and are still growing, Mr. Speaker. And I was delighted to discuss what more can be done to improve trade links and market access with the Vietnamese government during my recent visit.
Scotland's farming and fish sector produces some of the finest produce in the world, so will the Secretary of State do all he can to promote the sale of Scottish smoked salmon abroad as a premium product known the world over?
Secretary of State.
Well, I think I heard smoked salmon, Mr. Speaker, and it's not just smoked salmon. The most recent figures show that Scotland's world-leading food and drink sector accounted for 29% of all UK food and drink exports. To help the sector continue to flourish, this government has secured trade agreements with 71 non-EU countries and the EU, and the total UK trade with these partners is worth £808 billion.
Shannon.
Thank the Minister for that answer. Minister, Scotland's food exports have shown...
The order. Mr Cunningham, sit down. Jim Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Scotland's food exports, some of those companies have been prevented of trading with Northern Ireland. There is now an Intertrade UK body set up as a result of the discussions that have taken place. Can I ask the Minister this question? What is the Minister and his department doing to ensure that those companies who have stopped trading are encouraged to start trading again with Northern Ireland?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr Speaker, that in the UK command paper, we've setting up the East-West Council, and the East-West Council will work to bring around those solutions.
Jim Blackburn.
Question number 12, Mr Speaker.
Secretary of State.
I'm popular today, Mr Speaker. The UK government is working tirelessly to maximise opportunities following our departure from the European Union. Scotland continues to punch above its weight, both in exports of goods and services and foreign direct investment, and I'm delighted to be able to say that trade is now well above pre-Brexit levels.
Mr Speaker, Scotland has been hammered by Westminster's imposition of a hard Brexit, with the Scottish salmon industry alone suffering additional £12 million of Brexit red tape costs. Across every sector of Scotland's economy, Brexit has added red tape costs, limited access to vital workers and limited markets. Is the Secretary of State proud of his legacy and includes a deliberate and avoidable undermining of Scotland's economy?
Mr Speaker, as the honourable gentleman will appreciate, our departure from the EU has allowed us to forge new relationships. Consequently, Scotland's exports are performing well, up 13%.
David Doig.
Very much, Mr Speaker. Will friend join me in welcoming the completion of fisheries negotiations with Faroe, resulting in 2,200 tonnes of fishing quota, mostly for the Scottish fleet? And will he also agree that since the UK became an independent coastal state, the Scottish fleet and those who negotiate on their behalf, including the SNP, Scottish Government ministers and their officials, have a far stronger voice in these annual negotiations than if the SNP had their way and went back into the EU and common fisheries policy?
My honourable friend is a great champion for the fishing industry, and I completely agree with him.